So what we're gonna do is when you log into ZipForm, this is basically what you'll see is something like this, right? And what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to actually cover your login as far as your profile and etc. If you go to in the upper right hand corner where the picture should be is where your profile settings are. You want to go in there and you want to make sure your profile settings are set up correctly. So you click on that, it'll open up that aspect of it. And then when you're in here on this screen, for example, your name, phone number, and all that's in here, you make sure that's correct the way you want it, right? For example, and then down at the bottom, you have your email signature, and you need to have an email signature in here because you're going to be emailing people out of ZipForms, and you want that signature in there. You do not have to include your email in this because you're going to be emailing out to them. But you do want to have the company address or office address that you belong to. You want to have that in there, your name, maybe a phone number in there, if it's not, if nothing else. But it'll be on the most paperwork you send out to begin with, and I'll show you where that's at as well. Anytime you make changes in here, you want to make sure you click on save. I'm going to go through the rest of these real quick. When I clicked on this, when I open this up, it comes up to About Me, and then it goes into Sign In and Security. You can set that up the way you want to. I do not have two-factor authentication set up. However, in almost everything else I do, I have two-factor authentication. I just don't have it set up on ZipForms. It might be a good thing for you as an agent to set that up. On the forms, you have TREC, Texas Realtors, and RE/MAX Elite forms, depending on which office you're with. And form options down here on the bottom. If you have any questions about it, we can talk about them. But that's basically changing the text color and text block color and all that stuff. I've never, ever messed with that. I've been teaching ZipForm since about 2005. The only thing I could think of using that, or the only way I've ever used it, is like our oldest son is colorblind. So I use the colors to change that so he could see it versus what's on there. That's it. Products. We have your regular ZipForms. So for those of you that are new at this, you already, besides the company, you already have a ZipForm account, right? Texas Realtors has a ZipForm account for every realtor in the state of Texas. However, it doesn't have the tools that we have within the brokerage account, right? And you want to make sure that you use the brokerage account because this is also the office's or the company's filing system for your transactions, one of the ways. In addition to that, every transaction is supposed to be reviewed, and it cannot be reviewed if you're in the Texas Realtor account. So you want to make sure you're using this one. If you don't have this one, or you're not seeing some of the things I'm talking about, then let me know, and we can make sure that your name is in here, and maybe even change the password so that you get the right link to go in there. Anyway, some of the tools we have within the office, because of the brokerage account, you have Digital Link, you have MLS Connect. Now I'm in the Mission Harlingen one, so this gives us MLS Connect with Greater McAllen, but every one of our offices have MLS Connect, which means when I go to fill out a transaction on the buyer side, I can actually plug in the MLS number, and it'll bring everything out of MLS that I need for that transaction, which is what you want to do. Just makes it a little easier for you. ZipForm Mobile, because we have a brokerage account, we have ZipForm Mobile included, where you can actually do everything on your phone that we're about to do today to include electronic signatures with it. And then your settings. These are actually really important on the settings side. We want to make sure that, first off, that you set up the time, Central Time Zone. That's where we're at. That's what we want to use. So make sure you change that or set that to Central. And then you have landing screen. Which landing screen do you want? You can use Authentisign, Digital Link, or DocuSign, whichever one you choose. I've always used digital ink and I like that. So mine is set up with that. That was the first product that ZipForm had years ago for electronic signatures. But there's others here. You can use those if you want. DocuSign is available under NAR as benefits. It's not necessarily because of the brokerage. So one of the issues there is you start using it and NAR drops it like they did ZipForms, then it'll go away. So we had Texas Realtors was sponsoring ZipForms, and then NAR picked it up for every realtor nationwide. And then this last year, they did away with that. So then Texas picked it back up because almost every realtor in the state of Texas uses ZipForms. But we have a brokerage account, which gives us more tools, like I said, with that. Transaction preference. This is your auto save, and that should be on 5. When you first open it up, it's going to be off usually. So you want to set it at 5. So every 5 minutes, it automatically saves for you. That's real important because if you're in the middle of a transaction, you want it to save. The phone rings, you get distracted with something else. You want what you're working on to auto save and not just disappear on you. And then as we look at this, you have your few other little things on here where you can make decisions on how you want those. Let me touch base on down here at the bottom. The on hours for the company, I have it set up with home warranty integration. I have that on so that if this is again on the mission one, I think all the others are the same way. If you want to set it up so that you have integration, that's you as an agent. It's available. So if I had it off on our side, you wouldn't even have it available, right? And the title integration, the same thing, but there's no title companies in here whatsoever on that part of it. And we have earnest integration, earnest money integration. If you want to do that, you can have that set up on there. I did not turn on the insurance or the moving services because I've not seen a request or had a request for that. And the insurance one is a little touchy because the last time I know of somebody that dealt with that young Alfred company actually grabbed all the contacts out of the agent's files and emailed them about the insurance, which is not something we necessarily want, which is why that is off. However, if you wanted it on, we could probably work on that. The other one is notification. So we're still in the profile. We clicked on the profile. We're in the notification side of it. Right here is fairly important, email notification on a task or checklist. If you have those set up, you get notified by email. So you can set everything up in here so that you get notified when you have something coming up. If you're going to use that, I don't know of very many agents that actually use the task or checklist. They're in there. You can use them. You can set it up and customize it, but it is available. But you have to decide whether you want it. Doc inbox. I'm going to talk about that one in a little bit. That is set up so that you get an email notification if something comes into your doc inbox. And I'll show you how to use that here in a little bit. We also have document notification down here. If a document shows up, you get that. And then, of course, the broker approval, etc. We have that on here. Offer place we have not messed with. Hopefully will here in the near future. And then once again, just click on save to make sure you have that available for you. Any other questions on these, on that part? Anybody? All right. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard. When you submit a transaction or a form to be reviewed, this is what I see. I get an email first telling me that it's there. And then I'll see like this one. I have 13 forms. This is the mission Harlingen one, 13 forms to be approved. So I can go in there. But we're not going to focus on that right now. What I want to focus on is for you as an agent. So if you log in here, when you log into ZipForm and you see the screen, earlier I had mentioned Doc Inbox. For those of you that's new, I really think this is one of the best tools that ZipForm has available. And that's this doc inbox right here in the center where it says doc inbox. Remember, we turned that on a while ago. So when I click on documents, you see where it has this email address right there in the center of the screen. And that email address, I've said it several times last couple of years when they came out with this, I would make that email address my MLS email address. I would make that email address my MLS email address. And the reason for that is anything that gets sent to that email address is going to show up right here on this screen. So assuming that most of the stuff you get from MLS is going to be important, transactions, or here's an offer, here's forms, that kind of thing, I want it to go right there, right? That way I don't have to move it from AOL or Google or Outlook or whatever you have. It automatically comes into ZipForms by using this address. So please keep that in mind. All you have to do is click on Doc Inbox and it'll show up here. If I had a document here, let's say somebody did email me a document, then all I have to do is go to email to Doc Inbox, email to Doc Inbox. That's going to bring it into this one. Let me back up for a second. If I have it here, I can click on it and it'll allow me to transfer it over. If I click on the actual document, if it was in here, I click on it and transfer it over to the transaction. So if I go over to the transaction, inside that transaction, there's an email to transaction. And that's this one right here with the little mailbox. And for those of you that's new at this, this is the one. This is the email address that I would use for MLS for that listing. So if I had a listing on 123 A Street, so MLS will have two email addresses, one for my regular email, and then this one for the transaction for that listing. Every listing would have a separate email address. And what I would put in agent remarks is email all offers to this email address. And that way, everything that an agent sends in is going to go right to that email address, but right inside this transaction. And it makes it so much easier to manage with everything in one place. Everybody good there? All right, so for those of you that's new at this, let me just go back here for a second. I just want to show that one because that, to me, the doc inbox is one of the best parts of this as far as organizing, keeping yourself organized. If, as a new agent, one of the things you need to do is set up a template. So you click on templates and you're going to click on new. And when you click on new, it's going to ask you listing or purchase or whatever you want it to be. When you click on new listing, for example, now this is a new listing template, not a new listing, but a template, something you're going to use every time you get a listing. Instead of creating a new, let's do everything all over, you're going to create new, let's do some things over, but you're going to have everything all set up inside the template. So if I call this, just as an example, and I click on residential, here's what I'd like for you to look at as well. Before I click on anything, you see this second, you see the little blue dot right there where it says auto apply. Right below that, it says automatically apply this template to listings, and it has an asterisk new transaction. So every category here, you can create a template for every category. Like on mine that I have set up in Texas Realtors, I had one for listings for residential. I had one for condos. I had some for property management because the companies that I've worked with in the past. I have investors in there as templates. You can set up a template for anything. And the idea is it saves you time in the long run. So when I click on residential, for example, you're going to see where that asterisk is. Residential is going to pop in there. So every time I do that, it's going to auto-populate just for that specific one. So when I click on residentials, you see how residential went in there? And so then I want auto apply. So every time I create a new transaction, the template I'm about to build will be automatically applied to that new transaction. I don't even have to think about it, which is what we used to have to do. Now everything's automatic. It's so cool, right? And then you're going to have the option of applying some templates that are already created. Like you can have the office listing template, apply that to it and click on save. So what we created was the new listing agent template. You can see the name.
Max,
Yes.
I had a question. I know I'm following along on my laptop, so I'm following along on the template information. Before you clicked on save and residential, I know you clicked on below where it says select template. I see that there's an office, the buyer's representation package. If we do click on that, would it take us to the one the office already have saved, or how would that work?
Yes, that's exactly what those are. And so like on the ones for the mission office, I have on the listing side, as you can see on the screen right here, I have all kinds of forms in there. The other offices, I try to narrow that down a little bit. When I set the one for mission up, I put just about everything in there because the way business is done just a little different in the way agents handle them. But yes, you want to use the office template so it automatically pulls everything over. It's just the forms that we set up for that. Doesn't mean it's 100%. And I'll show you how you make some decisions about how you want to use that. So here's again, we're in the listing template, right? That's what we set up was a listing template and we called it new agent listing. And you can see on the left-hand side, because I used the office template to build mine, I now have initial docs, offers, and funding folder because that's what was set up for us at the office level. And if I click on initial docs, there's the initial docs I might want for a listing. Everything I need for a listing is right there, basically. And then offers, every time a wire fraud form is, I put it in the offer folder because you talk about wire fraud when you do the listing agreement. You talk about it when you do the, when you get an offer in, right? And that's where this would be printed off. It would be added to that offer. And then you have the funding folder, which has the funding form in it. So everything is all set up for you if you'll just use the templates as you try to build. And you have the same type of thing on the buyer side of that. So I'm going to go back over here to the initial documents. This is your template. You have everything here. So what you need to do now is take these and because I have new agent listing, for example, I want to take these and add my personal information to them. So when you open up the information about brokerage services, you want to personalize all of this, get all this filled out. And remember, it'll auto save, but if you're doing it real quick, I want to make sure you save it before you move out. So for example, on the left-hand side, you see that there's a save button right there. As soon as you make a change in here, it's going to automatically add that save button. And depending on which office you're in, will depend on how this is made up on the supervisor side of it. But every box on here on the IABS needs to be filled out. But anyway, click on save. It'll save that as your template. You want to fill this all out for every form where you know where things are going to go. So let's go to the listing agreement, for example. The idea of a template is, once again, if I fill out all the basic information, next time I get ready to do a transaction, I just bring that template and apply it to the transaction. So here, this is a listing agreement. And here I'm going to, let me see if I can do it. You plug your phone number in, your office address, all that stuff, whatever that is, plug that in, make it, this is yours, right? So you want to plug all that information in. Anything that's known, plug it in. So for example, you should be able to fill out all of this without having any problems. And then same thing on the phone number or email. And once again, just make sure you click on save. But again, the whole idea, like I just touched base on the information about brokerage services, but on the listing agreement, I'm going to go through and make sure that everything's in here that I would normally click on for listings I work with. Like for example, for me, I would probably plug in this, for example. I would probably plug in is not, because that's mine. Most of my properties are not in that. I normally plug in 30 days, right? In Cameron County. So you're building your template. So all you did was you clicked on new template, right? When you clicked on templates, clicked on new, and then you started. You should have a listing packet. You should have a buyer packet. And then anything else you might do, like for example, it may be a listing packet for condos or listing packet for residential or whatever and name it accordingly so that you have it to work with, right? And again, go through here and plug in whatever you would normally use. Broker will file with MLS. Anything that you would normally have on yours, plug it in there. Broker is authorized to use a key box. What is the commission breakdown? However you have it, whatever your norm is, because that's all that matters, right? Intermediary, yes. And again, save it. When you're done with it, all right? So now that form is completed, and if I go back here, any other forms I need should have some of the same information in it, because it usually carries over. So there's Remax Elite, Mac McFarland. All right, I didn't type that in there; it just automatically shows up because I put it in the other form, which was the listing agreement and our information about brokerage services. The whatever form you fill out first. So the primary form, if you fill it out, it'll copy over into the rest of them. So you have that. In fact, let's go to the funding folder. And if this is mapped correctly, this should, yeah, it should open up with your information. So you put your information in here because it's your funding folder, right? So it's always going to be yours. And you may not be able to mark anything else on here because that's going to depend on the transaction, but you have it all set up. All right, so that's basically setting up a template. Now, if you want to use disclosures, which is the, drawing a blank on it. Seller Shield, there you go. It's Seller Shield. If you want to use that, if you're going to use that, you can add it into your templates. So it becomes a part of what you're doing as well, which is recommended. All right, any questions about building the template out? And you see the new agent right here. So one of the reasons we like using ZipForm is if this little drop down right here, if I click on that, you see that screen that just opened up? I can do everything from right here that I need to do with this template. Everything I need to do is right there. I can click into it and do the same thing, right? Because it's a template. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. There's other things you can do with this. I'm going to show you. Let me do this real quick. So everybody see where it says Texas Association of Realtors? Yes. When I click on templates, these are some of my old ones. Like for example, Vera and Harris were investors. Linda Vista was a property I had worked on where it sold a couple times. Beller is an investor buying or selling. I have tenant forms, property management forms. FGMS was a bank I worked for. Beller was, again, this was his listing information if I listed a property. And that's what I'm talking about. There's buyer's packet, listing packet, etc. If you build it the way you want it to work for you. And I show you that only because you can have as many templates as you want, but create them so that you can use them. So what I'm talking about when I say use them, I'm going to go back to the dashboard. Let's say we just logged in. We have somebody wants to list their home for sale. So we built a listing packet, and we can do the same thing with a buyer packet, right? We're not right now. We're not going to. You can do the same thing. You want to do the same thing. Build a buyer template. But let's say somebody just calls in and says they're ready to list their home for sale. I'm going to go to transactions. And we click on new transaction. It's a new listing. And remember when I was doing the templates, I said automatically apply if residential. So I'm going to call this 123 A Street. Let's back that up. Let's call it 321 A Street. Now, right here is the MLS Connect. And I mentioned that earlier. Every one of our offices have MLS Connect. If you click on that, you can plug in the MLS number and it'll populate this with that information. So you don't need to do anything else with it, right? The name that we put on the file is the name we want on there. Generally speaking, most people that use ZipForms over the years they'll use an address for a listing and a name for a buyer or a name for a lease. But the address is usually on the listing side. Almost, that's pretty regular, right? So I have a name up here. If I go to MLS Connect, you guys see the screen that just opened up? And again, all I need is the MLS number. And when I plug in that MLS number, it'll bring all the information down here over for me, as well as any other information, such as the legal description and et cetera. That'll all come over. Seller's name, all that will come over. All right, so I have a transaction name. Now this is an actual transaction. Somebody called and said, hey, help me sell my property. I'm getting ready to go out and list the property for sale. On ZipForms, I'm going to click on residential. And when I do, it's going to change down at the bottom. Right. So now here's the new agent listing down on the bottom. That's the one we want to apply. So select the templates because that's the one we just did, right? And personal new agent listing. We want that one to apply. That's the one we just did. Click on save. And this window will open up. Now in here, you have a lot of options. This is inside the transaction. You have a lot of things you can play with in here. You can actually take this property summary screen, the one you're looking at in the center here. You can fill this out with everything. And if you do this, everything you put in here will carry over in most cases over into the transaction itself. So that helps. You can listing dates, all your information. This is a summary of what's going on. We used to have this as a hard copy and several agents would use it. Me personally, I didn't because I like to walk through the actual forms, make sure the information that's there is correct. But you can use this window for everything if you want. And then this is also where you go from prospect to active to pending to close. So if I take the listing today and we get an offer in tomorrow and we go to contract, I come into ZipForm, I change that over to pending. And the reason for that is it'll actually show on the brokerage side what we have working and not working, right? Who has what. But we're going to build this transaction real quick in here. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to click on documents. And when I click on documents, here's the initial documents, the offer, funding, just like we had set up in our template. And everything's going to be there that we already had set up or should be there. It didn't bring it over. Well, brought the funding folder, the most important one. Brought that over. It should bring over the other documents with us as well. If a document's not there and you need it, all you have to do is click on the right-hand side, or in this case, they're actually in the transaction here. So here's the seller's disclosure. Here's the listing agreement. Everything is right here. So I can click on these and move them up here at the top. Right here in the center, right here, you have move. So I can move those to my initial documents. And there's that wire fraud form. We talked about making sure that was in the offers folder. Whoops. So we're going to move it over to the offers folder. So we have that. Which means it probably didn't bring over the other items. Oh yeah, it did too. There you go. So not all of it. So once you have this set up and you actually start using it, you'll see how it works a lot better. This is rough. I have, because I'm on the management side of it, it has, if you looked at those templates, there's all kinds of templates in there on the management side of it. And it doesn't always bring it over the way it's supposed to. On here, when I'm inside this, if I'm building a transaction, right here where it says 321 A Street, this little drop down gives us everything we have going on with this on the right hand side. So we can email to the transaction, copy it, we can save it, import, export, etc. There's the net sheet, and these are the net sheets that I talk about that I would not recommend using. I recommend not using them. And the reason for that is use a title company's app or a title company's website if you're going to fill out a seller's net sheet. Works a little better. On here, one of the other things that we have is the retention date. So if I created this transaction today, ZipForm is going to hold on to it until 2030. Trek requires the broker to maintain records for 4 years. So that meets that requirement. We're good to go, right? And that's one of the reasons we want to make sure everything we have in the transaction is added to our transaction for that specific property. Everything's added to it. Everything gets added to it. Would be nice. All right, so on here, just so you see, we have the summary. That's the one where we started at. That's the summary screen. You also have parties on here. And on the parties, on the party side of it, you see listing agent. If you had a buyer in here, you'd have the buyer's name. You see right here where it says secure message. I can email out. So if the buyer was in here, if I was representing the buyer or the seller, in this case, we're on a listing. So the seller, for example, I could email them from here. I don't have to go back out to my email to email them. And what you see on the window, for example, and I click send, that's, I don't have to do anything with it because their email address is already in the transaction. It's automatically going to grab that. It's going to send it out, which is why when we're doing the profile, I said we want to make sure that we actually put a email signature in there because this is going to be a part of it. So you're going to send that message. That's actually just a message, not the email. But you want to send that out to them. And on that, once you've sent that, and everything else you do in this transaction gets recorded, which is another reason for using ZipForm. Everything and everything's real organized with it in that, right? There's the history. So here it says I sent a secure message, and it'll actually show you what the message is. If you, yeah. All right. If I send an email, it shows what the email is. I'm not getting messages. Where's Carrie at? Yes. That happens. Anyway, it gives us the record that the information has gone out to those individuals. We also have notes. So if I wanted to plug a note in here, I can plug a note in that and I can save that as well. So it becomes a part of the transaction. Everything we do with that transaction should be right here. So if I spoke to the seller today and they said to do this, or they said to do that, this would help me keep track of everything that went on within that transaction. So there's no guessing about what happened. I'm going to go back into the documents because there's a couple other things I want to touch base on real quick inside the documents. If I needed to send this out for electronic signature, I click on e-sign right here, and it's you can send with the Authentisign, just what we had set up, or you can go with DocuSign, whichever one you want. It's going to walk you through the process. And when it goes to walk you through the process, it's going to ask you for their email address. If it's not in the transaction, it's going to ask you for the email address, and then you're going to have to go from there, right? Like on this one, it doesn't have like a buyer and seller's email address or any of that stuff. So you're going to have to work from there. You can add participants. You can add signature blocks or blanks. You can add initials. There's a lot of things you can do with it. And this is one of those, when you go to send this out, you want to send it out. Whoops. You want to send it out so that it goes to them and then comes back to you so you can put your signature on there. So set it up for their signature and yours, and it'll save you a little bit of time. On here, for example, when we look at the signers, you want 1 and 2. I have ignore on this, and I would leave it that way personally, because I don't care who signs first. I just want to get it signed, right? We'll work from that aspect of it. Once you create a signature, when you try to do the e-signature and you send something out, it's going to create a little envelope for you, and it'll show that every time you go to click on it from then on, where it'll show the progress of it. And if you need to actually go in and adjust it, you can go in and adjust the documents, or you can go in and adjust the email addresses. If you start this off correctly, where you have the email addresses and you input them into the appropriate form, so listing agreement, for example, in this case, buyer rep agreement, if you're representing the buyer, input the email addresses into the forms, the system will pick those up for you most of the time. Is there anything in this business 100%? Nope. So you just got to adjust. It'll be okay. The other part of this that I want to make sure that I showed you is that if you send something over for review, when you click on a document, you have a couple different options here with this. So for example, I can go to summary. I can go to the summary screen, and I can click on submit for review right there. When you click on submit for review, this window opens up, and hopefully you guys can, everybody's seeing that. Yes, okay.
Yes.
I can see it on my side. Good. Thank you. So this window will open up, and all you that needs review, and you click apply. When you click apply from here, what I get is back here on the dashboard, it'll show, instead of showing forms, it'll show transactions 1, right? And then I have to try to figure out which forms need to be reviewed if you do it this way. So if you do it this way, where you're clicking on submit for review, hopefully you have the folder set up where you have a funding folder, and that's the one I'd click on to make sure you have everything in the folder in the transaction you need. Or you can put some notes in here. Mac, this is my first listing agreement. Can you please check this? Or this is my first listing. Can you take a look at the listing agreement and seller's disclosure, or seller's authorization to release? Whatever it is, can you please review this? If you put the notes in there, that's what I'll go look at. If you don't put any in there, then I have to guess at it, which sometimes can be interesting. So you can do it from here. That's not what I would recommend. What I would recommend is you go inside the transaction, and when you click on a form or 2 or 3, you click on this little clip right here for approval, and that box will open up. You have the same thing, but now we have specific forms that we want to have approved. Does that make sense? And again, if it's in the funding folder, you would just do the same thing. You'd have all the forms. So if you were submitting a listing to be approved, all the forms you needed for the listing that were signed, all the main forms, listing agreement, information about brokerage services, seller's disclosure notice, everything you need for that side would be here. I don't need MLS sheets. I don't need surveys unless there's a question, although I go look at them once in a while. I don't need the title commitment, although I go look at it once in a while. But the forms that you absolutely need, information about brokerage services, listing agreement, seller's disclosure, anything that may have gone on between the two parties, non-realty items addendum, things like that that were in the transaction, then yes, that's where that would be in there. And you just click on the corner, highlight those forms, and click on approval, and open that box up. Any other questions on that one? So a couple other little things here is when I have the transaction open, there's a lot of little things I can do. You have some tools here that you can use, and some of them may or may not be, may or may not work or show up all the time, like strikeout, for example. So strikeout is designed just for that, so you can strike something out. However, it will not work on a promulgated form. So it's not going to work on any of the contracts. It's not going to work on third-party financing. Anything that's been promulgated from TREC, you cannot use strikeout on. This is a Texas Realtors form, so you can strike out whatever you want, but it shouldn't be something you want. It should be what the client wants, right? And I got to tell you, I've done this a long time. Other than working for repo banks, never struck anything out, and I don't do it anyway. I let them do it. It works a whole lot better that way. And the same thing with highlights. I can highlight something in here, but again, the attorneys have said that's not a good practice because that changes the emphasis from the whole sentence to that one word or one set of words, that kind of thing. I have used that to try to get the client's attention on specific items. Just know what you're doing with it so that you don't cause any issues. Like, for example, if we've had a conversation, I need to remind them that you're going to leave the attic fans or whatever it is. I get to highlight that just as a reminder to let them know, right? Something of that nature. The one that I wanted to actually talk about real quick is real important, is right here above the document where it says addenda. Addenda. And there's an agent from Mission that was supposed to be here and she's not, of course. If you click on that paperclip and click on add addendum, what that's going to do is it's going to open up a window where I can type in paragraph title, like parties, paragraph 1, and then I can type in 14 different names if I wanted to, right? And then click on save. Now, if you notice that up here in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little arrow there. When I put the cursor on it, it'll tell me what it is, parties, right? But what it does for me is that if I had 5 sellers, for example, there's not 5 sellers blanks down here. So what am I going to do? So what I do is I add that to this. And when the time comes, I have them at the end. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So here's where let's say I decided I wanted to add in 5 names for the parties. And as I scroll down, and by the way, you can see the little 1 up here at the top right there. That means that there's something attached to it. And when I scroll down, there's the addendum that we just created for the parties. And now people can sign here. So we have everything we need on that form instead of trying to create something new. All right, so that's the way to add addenda to it. Makes it work really well. There is sticky notes, and I used this the other day with a couple of the agents. I can take this sticky note, plug it in here, put some notes on it. I could add another one. Put some notes on that. It will save them. If I click on save, it'll save those sticky notes, but it will not print them. Now, when I go to print the form, again, this form, come on. Oh, there it is. When I go to print this form, it shows the form, but not, hopefully you guys are seeing that. It'll print the form, but not the sticky notes. Right. So we have that to work with as well. If I go to send, I can send with sticky notes. So let's say I want to send it to Jessica. Down at the bottom, it says include form sticky notes right there. Also says copy me. You don't necessarily need to do that because the system is going to show that you sent it. But if you want it, you can. The other thing is from here, and again, what I clicked on here was send, right? Just click on send email. From here, if I have a need to, I can also fax and attach the fax cover sheet. The fax cover sheet has a barcode on it. And when they fax back to you, that barcode is going to tell the fact there's an 800 number. That's ZipLogix. ZipLogix is going to get it in the system. It's going to come right back into this transaction. I've used that so many times and it's absolutely great to use. If you have somebody that can only fax or they desire to have a fax versus an email. The client I had was she could get an email, she could print, but she didn't know how to scan it in to fax it back, or how to scan it in to email it back. I'm sorry, but she knew how to fax. So I showed her how. I walked her through on the phone how to connect her home line to her printer and then do the fax. And I sent her just a fax cover sheet so she could fax back to me. Because otherwise she was gonna have to drive into town and go to Kinko's and do all that stuff. So just do it that way. When you click on email here, just so you know, right here, it gives you options on email. What do you want to use? And if you use ZipForm, it'll use this system for you. And again, it'll track it in the history. So you have that on the email side. But I can, from here, use Gmail or Microsoft. I just need to set it up so that it's set up that way. So if I click on that, for example, send, it's going to ask me some questions about it. See, input required. Yeah, subject. There. It's going to ask me to sign into my Gmail account. All right. It's not going to just send it out like that. So just stay with ZipForm and it'll work a whole lot easier for you. And it'll go out the way you need it to go out. Anybody have any questions about that part?
I actually had a question
ma'am.
about the email that you mentioned earlier that ZipForm provides us with, that you do recommend we change it for the MLS as well. Is there any way we would be able to change it here on ZipForm to the one we already have on the MLS?
There's not. No, this is ran within their system. So, and again, you don't have to do that. It's just, I'm saying that if it was me, I would do that just because of the amount of business I would plan on doing.
Oh, okay.
And if you don't want to change this for the MLS, that's fine. Just when you're inside a transaction, use that one at least for the transaction. Or when you get a listing, you have that email for that transaction. And that way it'll come straight to you and this transaction. So if you email to that email that's up there right now, it'll come in to this file specifically. And I can email from here myself, for example. I could send an email out to somebody just right from the transaction. So the system's awesome for the biggest part. And if you were to receive a document in here, normally what it's going to do is it's going to show up. There'll be a folder over here on the side. It'll say doc inbox, and it'll be on the bottom as well, so that you know that you have that. In fact, if anybody had anything real quick, we could just do that so I can demo that, because that works. It's a dynamite tool to use inside the transaction. Whoops. Jeez, quit that. So if somebody wanted to email that real quick, I know that's hard to do, trying to read it off the screen, but if you were to email that, it would come right into this file. Anyway, also, if you needed just a fax cover sheet for this transaction, again, we're in 321 A Street. If I needed just a fax cover sheet for this one, I could click on that, and that's the barcode I was talking about. That barcode, if you send it to that 866, it's not an 800 number, it's 866. If you send it to that number, if you fax to that number, that barcode will bring it right in here into this file. So it works really, and that I've used a lot, and it works really well. All right, let me go back here and show you a couple other items at the very beginning of this. And ZipForm has, if you go underneath help, they have live classes. Most of them are usually 30 to 45 minutes. There's some a little longer than that. They're webinars. They have recorded classes as well that you can take on there, but in addition to the ones that we have. So here's what I was talking about earlier. If you do the summary, if you just clicked on summary and submitted the summary, which some agents do all the time, there's a couple of them, that's all they do. I would see a number right here. and there's nothing available, right? If I go to documents to approve, there's 14. And this recent activity that we have on the right-hand side shows you what people have been in here where D has requested an approval of a document. Vicky has had a transaction fall through. Sue Ann was in here a while ago, right? I created a transaction. This history, I get this on my regular email. I have them linked together so I can see this there as well to see what's going on without actually logging into ZipForm. So these were done by, so they opened the transaction, clicked on the documents, and submitted those documents for approval. That's what this is about, right? So here, when I go in here, this is what I was hoping to, one of the things I wanted to show you is, here, here's the transaction name on the left-hand side. I can look at each document this way, or what I do most often is I'll go into the transaction. And on the left-hand side, and you see Vicky has this set up her own little way, which is okay. If I click on closing documents, there's everything I should need for closing. And that's what I was referring to earlier. Right. So then I can open up these and see what she has. If there's anything I'm missing, I can go through and look at it. And if it's not there, then I send her a message, let her know about it. Sue Ann, I'm going to click on her transaction. And you can see she has some of the same type of things, but she doesn't have a funding folder specifically. So each agent, it helps if you have a funding folder, especially when you get started, because I'm not gonna know for sure where to go. In this case, this is a new listing on it. So we have the listing agreement, seller's disclosure, information about brokerage services, etc. on it. We don't have anything else. So I've worked with Sue Ann for years, so I understand how she does it. Here's one with D. Here's the transaction, and all she submitted is the funding form, which should tell me that everything else is in the file has been checked already. So when I click on the file, now you can see hers, initial docs, offer, funding docs, just like we have set up on the template. And there's all of her forms have been checked already. And now all she's doing is getting the funding form checked. This makes it so much easier than just clicking on summary and sending over a bunch of forms. And right now there's only a handful of people that do that. But it's enough to drive you to drinking. Oh, just joking. Anyway, anybody have any other questions or comments on these? All right. So once again, your first step as an agent coming in or just getting started with this is to set your profile up, set the profile up, set the templates up. And within the profile, your email address, I'm sorry, your email signature, the time, and then your notices. How do you want your notices set up? You know your schedule, you know what you do better than anybody else. Set it up for what you need. Then set up your templates. Get the templates set up. And if you have a question about which forms to use, you can go into, let me just show you this one little thing here, and then we'll get out of here. If you have a question about which forms to use, you can go to transactions. Oh, I'm sorry. You can go to forms. That'll work. Go to forms. And in the form library on the right-hand side, everybody should be able to see that form library. Yes, right-hand side. Yes. Okay. Just type in FDES. And that's form description and reference. And this tells you every form that's available, track, Texas Realtors, everything that's available and how it is used. They have them by category like residential, commercial, etc., and all the addenda that go with that. So that works best. If you have buyer tenant representation agreements, what might go with that? And then you also have all the other ones. There's, I want to say like, there's over about 150 forms in here altogether to mess with. So, but know that it's in here. This is what I use to set up the templates to begin with, back in 2005 or before. And it's what I used when I set up the ones for the office as well. And I have a copy of that right here. But that'll help you learn the files, the forms as well. All right, any questions about anything we covered?